Eleanor Walsh stood in front of the mirror in the hotel bathroom, adjusted the strap of her navy dress, and reminded herself of the facts. She was 33 years old. She had designed 4 buildings that had won national recognition. She had rebuilt her career from scratch once before, and she had done it without asking a single person for help. Tonight was just another room, just another event, just another evening of smiling at people she didn't particularly like, while drinking champagne she didn't particularly enjoy. The Whitmore Gala was the most important charity event in New York's architectural and real estate calendar. 300 people, old money and new money, seated at the same tables, pretending they couldn't tell the difference. Elena had been invited as a featured guest. Her firm, Walsh Design Group, had recently been shortlisted for the Hudson River Cultural Center Commission, the largest public architecture contract in the state in over a decade. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. It was also supposed to be a date. She glanced at her phone. Daniel had texted 20 minutes ago, running 5 minutes late. "Save me a seat," with a smile emoji that she hadn't returned. Daniel Cho was a financial analyst she'd been seeing casually for 6 weeks. He was kind, attentive, and completely unremarkable in all the ways that suggested he was probably exactly what she needed right now. Not exciting, stable, safe. She tucked her phone into her clutch, looked at herself one last time, and walked out of the bathroom. The ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel was everything it was supposed to be. Crystal chandeliers fractured the light into 1,000 directions. Circular tables draped in cream linen stretched across a floor that had been polished to mirror brightness. The city's skyline pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows like an audience that hadn't been invited inside. A string quartet played something classical and largely ignored in the far corner. Elena moved through the room with the practiced ease of someone who had learned, very young, that the most effective way to navigate powerful spaces was to appear as though you already belonged in them. She accepted a glass of sparkling water, not champagne, not yet, and began the slow circuit of the room that every professional networking event required. She was halfway through her third conversation, something about sustainable construction materials, when she felt it, not heard it, felt it. A shift in the room, a subtle recalibration of energy, the way the air changes before a storm when the pressure drops and every living thing adjusts without knowing why. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. Heads turned fractionally. The string quartet continued playing, but somehow their music seemed quieter. Elena turned toward the entrance. He walked in alone, no entourage, no assistant trailing behind him with a phone and a schedule. Just a man in a dark suit that fit with the kind of precision that suggested it had been made specifically for his body, moving through the room as though the crowd was a landscape and he was simply passing through it. He was tall, not excessively, but enough that the line of his shoulders cut across Elena's sightline when a full table stood between them. His face was still, not blank, still. The difference was everything. Blank meant nothing was happening beneath the surface. Still meant something was happening that he had simply decided you would never see. Someone near Eleanor whispered a name. Kang Ji-hoon. She knew the name. Everyone in the room knew the name. Kang Meridian Group had landed in New York 4 months ago with the kind of entrance that didn't require press releases. $2 billion in announced acquisitions, a penthouse in Tribeca, and a reputation that had arrived from Seoul several years before the man himself. The financial press called him calculated. His competitors used other words. The stories about exactly how he had built his empire and what he had done to protect it lived in the gray area between rumor and record, in the space where powerful men operated when they understood that certain things were more effectively communicated by silence than statement. Elena watched him for exactly 3 seconds, then returned to her conversation. She was not here for him. She found her table, found her seat, and found Daniel Cho sliding into the chair beside her 17 minutes later, with an apology that he delivered with enough charm to make it almost convincing. He looked good. He always looked good. She smiled at him and let him take her hand on top of the table and told herself that this was enough. That enough was actually quite a lot, if you were honest about it. The evening progressed. Dinner was served, speeches were made. The Hudson River Cultural Center Commission was mentioned twice, and both times Elena felt the quiet pride of someone who had earned the right to be mentioned in that room in that context. After years of work that had often asked more of her than she'd had to give. She was reaching for her water glass when Marcus Cole stood up. The name landed in her chest like something cold. Marcus Cole, her former business partner. The man she had spent 3 years building Walsh Cole architecture with before discovering, 18 months ago, that he had been systematically diverting client payments through a secondary account she hadn't known existed, and had been signing her name to documents she had never seen. The legal process had been ugly, the settlement had been private, the professional damage had been, she had believed, largely contained. She had believed wrong. Marcus was at the microphone before she fully registered that he had crossed the room. He was smiling the way he always smiled when he was about to say something that would cost someone else dearly. She had learned to read that smile in the 3rd month of their partnership. She had simply not acted on what it told her early enough. "I want to take a moment," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the ease of a man who had spent years making rooms listen to him, "to address something that I think deserves transparency. Given that Walsh Design Group has been shortlisted for the Hudson River Commission, a public project funded by public money, I believe the public deserves to know about certain financial irregularities that came to light during the dissolution of our former partnership." The room went very quiet. Elena set down her glass. "Irregularities," Marcus continued, "that were, as I understand it, never fully investigated. Payments that couldn't be accounted for. Documentation that raised serious questions about professional integrity." He paused, smiled again. "I say this not with any personal animosity, but because I believe that anyone entrusted with public funds should be held to the highest standard. And I'm not certain Elena Walsh meets that standard. 300 people. 300 people in a room that had gone as quiet as a held breath, and every single face that Elena could see was turned toward her. Some with shock, some with the particular expression that people wear when they are witnessing something they are relieved is not happening to them. Some, the ones who had always found her success slightly inconvenient, with something that looked uncomfortably close to satisfaction. Daniel's hand was no longer on hers. She hadn't noticed him remove it. She sat completely still. Her face gave away nothing. Years of professional discipline had built that wall high and strong, but inside her chest something was fracturing along a seam that had been cracked for a long time. She had handled the fallout of Marcus's betrayal once before. She had rebuilt. She had documented everything, hired lawyers, protected herself. She had done everything right. And now he was standing at a microphone at the most important event of her professional year, dismantling it all with the calm confidence of a man who knew that in rooms like this one, the accusation mattered more than the truth. She gathered herself to stand, and then someone else stood first. The sound was almost nothing. A chair moving back, fabric shifting, the quiet displacement of a large body rising from a seated position. But in that particular silence, it carried. Heads turned, and continued turning, following the direction of the movement toward a table near the window where Kang Ji-hoon rose from his chair with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had never once rushed toward anything in his life because he had never needed to. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. He simply stood, and the weight of his standing and the physical fact of it, the unspoken implication that he had chosen this moment to make himself visible, pressed against the room like a hand placed flat against a surface. Marcus's smile faltered. Barely. But Elena saw it. Ji-hoon adjusted the cuff of his jacket, one slow, precise movement. Then he looked at Marcus with an expression that contained no anger, no aggression, no visible emotion of any kind. Just attention. The kind of attention that made the recipient suddenly acutely aware of how much they did not know about the person giving it. "I wonder," Ji-hoon said, his voice quiet enough that the room had to lean toward it, his English precise and unhurried, carrying the faint architecture of another language beneath it. "If you are aware of what you are doing," Marcus blinked. "I'm simply—" "You are making a public accusation," Ji-hoon said, "against a professional whose work I have reviewed extensively in preparation for my company's New York development portfolio. An accusation that I expect you cannot support with documentation." Or you would have provided it to the relevant legal bodies rather than a charity gala. He paused. This is not a courtroom, and you are not a prosecutor. What you are doing has a different name. The silence in the room had changed quality. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of 300 people who had suddenly become very interested in not making any unnecessary movements. Marcus's mouth opened and closed once. Then he stepped back from the microphone. Ji-hoon's gaze moved, slowly, deliberately, from Marcus to Eleanor. For 1 second, perhaps 2, he simply looked at her. His expression didn't shift, didn't soften. There was no reassurance in his eyes, no apology on her behalf, no performance of sympathy for the room's benefit, just a direct, level gaze that said without any words at all that he had seen exactly what had just happened, that he had found it unacceptable and that he was done with it. Then he sat back down. The string quartet, who had paused without seeming to realize it, resumed playing. The room exhaled. Elena picked up her water glass and drank slowly, her hand completely steady, and did not look at the empty chair beside her where Daniel had been sitting before she'd noticed him slip away toward the far side of the room. She found Ji-hoon's card on the table when she returned from the restroom an hour later, cream cardstock, his name in both English and Korean. A handwritten note on the back in small, even script, "My team will contact you tomorrow. K." She turned it over twice, put it in her clutch. His team contacted her at 9 the following morning. By 10:30, she was sitting across from Kang Ji-hoon in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the Kang Meridian, New York offices, with a document on the table between them and a view of the city that made her own firm's offices look like they had been designed by someone with modest ambitions. He was already seated when she arrived. He didn't stand when she entered. He looked up from the document he'd been reading, watched her cross the room and take the chair across from him, then set the document aside. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You didn't give me much of a choice," Milena replied. Something moved in his expression, not quite amusement, something adjacent to it. "I gave you a card. You could have ignored it." "I considered it. But you're here." "I'm here," she agreed, and left the rest of it unspoken because they both understood the rest of it. She was here because Marcus Cole had detonated something carefully constructed last night, and because the man sitting across from her had walked into the blast radius without being asked, and because whatever his reasons were, she needed to understand them before she decided what to do next. Ji-hoon slid the document across the table. Elena looked at it. It was a contract, 12 pages, formatted with the particular density of language that indicated serious lawyers had spent serious time on every word. Her eyes moved through the first page with the efficiency of someone who had been reading contracts for a decade. 6 months, she said. 6 months, he confirmed, as your official American liaison, public events, development announcements, community consultations, and design consultation on 3 projects currently in proposal stage, he added. Your professional expertise is the primary reason for this arrangement. Last night was simply accelerating. She looked up from the document. Accelerating what? A decision I had already been considering. He said it without elaboration, the way he apparently said everything, as though context was the listener's problem to arrange. Your firm's work on the Riverside Commons project demonstrated an understanding of urban space that my current design team lacks. I wanted Walsh Design Group involved in the New York expansion. The events of last night made the terms more urgent. And what do you get from a public liaison arrangement that you couldn't get from simply hiring my firm directly? He was quiet for a moment, not searching for the answer. She had the feeling Ji-hoon very rarely searched for answers, more as though he was deciding precisely how much of the answer to give. My company is new in this city, he said. My reputation in Seoul does not translate cleanly into American professional culture. There are people in this market who have decided before meeting me what I am. Having a partner who is known, respected, and established changes those conversations. Elena set the document down, and the fact that you publicly defended me last night is now leverage. He didn't look offended. It is a circumstance that makes you more likely to say yes. That's not the same thing as leverage. From where I'm sitting, the distinction is difficult to identify. Then, let me be direct. He leaned forward slightly, just slightly, the first movement she'd seen him make. That suggested something other than complete stillness. I am offering you a contract that gives your firm 3 significant projects, restores your professional standing in the most public way possible, because being associated with Kang Meridian will make Marcus Cole's accusations look like what they are, and compensates you at a rate that I suspect exceeds your current firm's annual revenue. In return, you give me 6 months of your time and your professional skill. He held her gaze. I am not asking you to pretend to be something you're not. I am asking you to work. Elena looked at the document again. She had spent 3 years rebuilding from Marcus's damage. She had done it the slow way, the honest way, the way that let her sleep at night. She had told herself more than once that patience was its own form of power. She believed that. She still believed it. But she also knew the way rooms worked. She knew what Marcus's speech last night had set in motion. The whispers, the second-guessing, the quiet phone calls between people who had been deciding whether to put her name forward for projects, and were now probably deciding not to. The Hudson River Commission was almost certainly gone. The thing about accusation was that truth was a slow-moving vehicle, and reputation damage traveled considerably faster. One condition, she said. Ji-hoon waited. The contract terminates at my discretion. If at any point during these 6 months I decide this arrangement is no longer serving its stated purpose, I can end it with 30 days' notice. Non-negotiable. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. Then, add it to page 9. Initial it. She added it to page 9. She initialed it. Then she signed, and so did he. And when the pen left the paper, there was a silence between them that felt different from the silences that had preceded it. As though they had both, without quite meaning to, stepped across a line they had been approaching from opposite directions. The first 2 months were exactly what they had agreed to. Professional, efficient, occasionally tense in the way that close professional proximity always created tension. Not personal, just the friction of 2 people with strong habits learning to navigate shared space. Elena attended press events, development consultations, meetings with city planners, community boards, prospective investors. She was good at it. She had always been good at translating the technical into the human, at making complex urban planning proposals feel like something that mattered to people who didn't speak the language of architecture. Ji-hoon watched her work with the same expressionless attention. He appeared to give everything, and said nothing about it, which she had learned to interpret as the closest he came to approval. He ran his offices with the atmosphere of a functioning earthquake. Everything moved, everything had purpose, nothing stopped unless he directed it to stop. His executives, a team of 6 Korean men and 2 American women, who had the particular exhausted competence of people who were very good at their jobs and were regularly asked to do more than their jobs required, operated at a frequency that Elena initially found exhausting and eventually found clarifying. There was no ambiguity in Kang Meridian's New York office. What was required was required. What was not required did not exist. Ji-hoon himself arrived at the office before anyone else and left after everyone else, a schedule that Elena discovered only because she had developed the habit of arriving early and began to notice that his light was always already on. He didn't make small talk. In 6 weeks he asked her 3 personal questions: where she had studied, how she had started her firm, and what she had wanted to be before she decided on architecture. Each question arrived without preamble in the middle of other conversations, as though he had been carrying them for a while and had simply decided to put them down. She answered them. He didn't follow up, didn't offer equivalent information about himself, just absorbed what she said and returned to whatever they had been discussing. She told herself this was fine. This was professional. This was exactly what she had signed. But in the 3rd month, things shifted. It started with Daniel. She had ended things with Daniel 2 weeks after the gala, by text which she wasn't proud of, but which had felt honest given that his primary response to her public humiliation had been to put physical distance between himself and her as quickly as possible. He had replied with a message that was equal parts wounded dignity and subtle blame. She had not replied to that. What she hadn't expected was for Daniel to appear at a Kang Meridian event. He was there as a guest of one of the American investors, a mutual contact, a collision of professional circles that New York created regularly without apology. Eleanor saw him across the room before he saw her and had calculated the room's geography to avoid a direct encounter when Ji-hoon appeared at her elbow. She wasn't sure how he knew something was wrong. She hadn't changed her expression. She hadn't moved differently. But something must have shifted in the way she was reading the room, because Ji-hoon arrived beside her with the quiet certainty of someone who had already identified the problem and decided to be physically present before she'd asked him to. "Form a date," she said, her voice low and even. "It's fine." Ji-hoon said nothing. He simply remained beside her, not possessively, not performatively, just present in the solid, immovable way he occupied all space. When Daniel made his way across the room toward her 20 minutes later, Ji-hoon was still there. "Elena." Daniel's smile was calibrated. "Small world." "It is," she agreed. "You look well." He glanced at Ji-hoon with the particular assessment of a man trying to determine exactly how to categorize what he was looking at. Ji-hoon looked back at him with the expression of a man who had already categorized what he was looking at and found it entirely unremarkable. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When Daniel moved away, Elena exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly, to Ji-hoon. He didn't acknowledge it directly, but his shoulder, which had been angled toward her the entire duration of the conversation, didn't shift away. They stood like that for another minute or two, close enough that she could hear him breathe, before someone approached with a question about the development timeline, and the moment ended. She told herself she didn't think about it afterward. She thought about it quite a bit afterward. The third month brought a different kind of collision. Her name was Soo-yeon Park, Ji-hoon's former head of strategy in Seoul, who arrived in New York for what was described as a brief operational visit and remained for 3 weeks. She was 36, precisely composed, and had the particular quality of someone who had known Ji-hoon for long enough to read silences that were opaque to everyone else. She was not unkind to Elena. She was something more unsettling than unkind. She was assessing. Elena noticed the way Ji-hoon's manner shifted in Soo-yeon's presence. Not warmer, but older somehow, like a door opening onto a room that had been furnished a long time ago. There were conversations in Korean that stopped when Elena entered. There were references to shared history that weren't explained. Once, she passed the open door of Ji-hoon's office and saw Soo-yeon place a hand briefly on his arm and say something that made him close his eyes for precisely 2 seconds before opening them again with the face firmly back in place. Elena kept walking, kept her face arranged, kept working. But something had tightened in her chest that had no professional justification, and she was not honest enough with herself yet to name it. She was reviewing the Hudson Pier design documentation late one evening when Soo-yeon appeared in the doorway of the conference room with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of someone who had decided to stop being careful. "You're wondering about me," Soo-yeon said, sitting down without invitation and pushing 1 cup across the table. "I'm working," Elena said. "You're working and wondering." Soo-yeon wrapped both hands around her cup. "We were together for 2 years, Ji-hoon and I, a long time ago. It ended because he—" She paused, choosing words with visible care. "Because he went somewhere I couldn't follow, not geographically, he just closed. And when he closes, there's nothing left to hold on to." Eleanor looked at her carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have known him for 11 years and I have never seen him do what he did at that gala." Soo-yeon held her gaze steadily. "I have never seen him stand up for someone." She paused. "I wanted you to understand what that means. Whether you choose to do anything with that understanding is entirely your own business." She left before Elena could formulate a response. Elena sat with her coffee going cold and the design documents unread in front of her, and tried very hard not to sit with the things Soo-yeon's words had placed directly in the center of her chest. The rupture came in the 4th month. It came from Marcus, as things had a way of doing. He had filed a formal professional misconduct complaint with the State Architectural Board, not during the dissolution of their partnership, not 18 months ago when the damage might have been fresh, but now. Timed, Elena understood immediately, for maximum damage. The Hudson River Commission was still technically undecided. If the board opened a formal review, her name would be in a grey area at precisely the wrong moment. She was in Ji-hoon's office when she received the notification. He watched her read it from behind his desk, his expression unchanged, and said nothing while she processed what she was looking at. Then she looked up and said very evenly, "Did you know he was going to do this?" Ji-hoon's eyes sharpened. "Explain what you mean. The complaint was filed 4 days ago. You have people who track things like this. You knew about Marcus before the gala. That's clear from the way you responded that night. I want to know if this—" She stopped, reorganized. "I want to know if any part of this arrangement was designed by you to have a specific outcome that benefits your company at my expense." The silence between them was different from any previous silence. It had weight and edges. Ji-hoon rose from his chair. He came around the desk with the deliberate, measured movement she had come to read as his version of intensity, and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to maintain the directness she was determined not to surrender. "No," he said. One word, but with the particular quality of a statement that has been stripped of every unnecessary element because it needs to be believed. "I did not know about the complaint. I knew Marcus Cole's reputation before the gala because I had done due diligence on every significant player in the New York architectural market before entering it. What I saw that night was a man using a public forum to damage someone for reasons that had nothing to do with professional accountability." His voice was lower now, not raised, it never raised, just quieter and more precise. "I stood up because what was happening was wrong. That is the entire reason." She held his gaze, looking for the seam in it, the calculation, the professional angle. She didn't find one. "The misconduct complaint is addressed," he said. "My legal team contacted the board this morning. The documentation from your lawyers during the dissolution, combined with testimony from 3 former Walsh Cole clients who have agreed to provide statements, will close the review before it opens formally." Elena stared at him. "You were already handling it." "I was handling it. Before I even knew about it. You would have known today. I was going to tell you this afternoon." She turned away from him, walked to the window. Outside, the city arranged itself in its usual impossible geometry, all that human effort stacked and ordered and reaching upward, and she stood looking at it and felt something complicated moving through her that she didn't have a clean category for. "You could have told me," she said. "You could have. You keep doing things and not telling me. Handling things, making decisions about my situation without—" She stopped. "Without your permission," he said. "Yes." A pause. Then, from behind her, "You're right." The acknowledgement landed so unexpectedly that she turned back around. Ji-hoon was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not apologetic, she doubted he did apologetic particularly well, but something that suggested an internal reckoning, as though her words had arrived somewhere that had not been prepared to receive them. "I will not do that again without telling you first," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "All right." They stood in the distance between them, and neither moved to close it, and the afternoon light fell through the windows in long angles, and for the first time in 4 months, Elena felt the full complexity of where she was, and what it was beginning to mean. She found out about the photograph by accident. She had stayed late alone in the office. Ji-hoon had left at 7, the first time she could remember him leaving before her, and had gone to the printer room to retrieve a document. On the small shelf beside the printer, between a stapler and a box of paper clips with the particular placement of something that had been moved there deliberately, or had been there long enough to become invisible to everyone who worked around it, was a photograph. It was small, framed simply in black metal. A man and a boy, the man in a business suit, the boy perhaps 4 or 5 years old, being held against the man's chest with an arm that, even in a still image, communicated something absolute. The man's face was turned toward the child. He was smiling. She had worked in this office for 4 months. She had never seen Ji-hoon smile like that. She stood in the printer room for a long time with the document forgotten in her hand. She didn't ask about the photograph. Something in the way it had been placed there, visible but not displayed, present but not explained, told her that this was not information that was hers to request. But the image stayed with her. The man in the suit holding the small boy with that unguarded, unperformed tenderness. The face that was entirely different from the face she saw every day and had begun, without noticing the moment it happened, to watch for small changes in the way you watch a sky that's been overcast for a long time, for any shift toward light. The evening it broke open was in the 5th month. They were working late, genuinely late, past midnight, the office empty around them, the city outside reduced to its nighttime architecture of light and distance. A deadline for the pier proposal had been moved up. They had been in the same room for 6 hours, with nothing between them but coffee and blueprints, and the particular exhaustion that stripped away social maintenance. Elena had her jacket off. Her hair was no longer what it had been at 9 that morning. She was sitting cross-legged in her chair with reading glasses she'd stopped being self-conscious about an hour ago, working through a structural annotation that was resisting her best efforts. Ji-hoon was at the other end of the table. His jacket was also off. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm in the first concession to physical comfort she had ever seen him make. He was reading something, a pen in his hand, not writing with it, just holding it, which she had noticed he did when he was thinking hard about something. "The load calculation on Section C is wrong," she said. "I know," he said. "I've been looking at it. It's an error from the initial survey. Your structural team should have—" "I know," he said again. "I'll speak to them in the morning." Silence. The pen turned in his fingers. "Ji-hoon," she said, and then stopped. Because she hadn't planned to start a sentence, she didn't know how to finish. He looked up. "The photograph," she said. "In the printer room." He was very still. "You don't have to tell me," she said quickly. It's not my business. I've been thinking about it for a month and I don't know how to stop." A long silence. Then Ji-hoon set the pen down. "My son," he said. The words came out with a quality she had never heard from him, not broken, not soft, just stripped of the professional architecture that usually held them in shape. "He passed away 3 years ago. He was 6. The room held them. Elena didn't say anything. She didn't say "I'm so sorry" or reach for any of the things that were reflexively offered in these moments, because they felt inadequate for a grief that had been quietly occupying every silence she'd been in with this man for 5 months without her knowing its name. "The photograph is on the shelf because I can't have it on my desk," Ji-hoon said, "because I can't look at it for 8 hours straight and still function, but I can't not have it here." He was looking at the table. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "He was very funny. He laughed at things I didn't understand were funny until he explained them. He was 6 years old, and he could explain jokes to me." Elena felt something tear open behind her sternum. "I've never—" Ji-hoon stopped again. He appeared to be negotiating with something internal, something that was larger than his usual containment. "I don't tell people about him. Soo-yeon knows, 2 others. You don't have to explain why you're telling me," Elena said. He looked at her. The look lasted long enough for her to see what was usually invisible, the full weight of what he carried, the exhaustion beneath the stillness, the specific loneliness of a person who has closed themselves so completely that they have forgotten how much they have kept out along with everything they were trying to keep in. "I stood up at the gala," he said, "because you looked the way I felt for the first year after my son died, like you were trying to hold a shape that was breaking and you weren't going to let anyone see you fail at it. And I knew that the people in that room were going to let it happen. Just watch, and I couldn't." Elena set her glasses down on the table. She didn't trust her voice for a moment, and so she didn't use it. Then, "I was holding it," she said, "for about 4 more minutes, and then you stood up and it turned out I only needed to hold it for 4 more minutes." Ji-hoon looked at her for a long time. "Elena," he said, and then, quietly, as though the word had been waiting a long time to be said at the correct volume, "I don't know what this is." "Yes, you do," she said. His jaw tightened. He exhaled through his nose. "I told myself it was professional, that it was—" "I know," she said. "I told myself the same." The contract ends in 3 weeks," she said. "That was always the date. That doesn't have to determine anything else. He looked at her with an expression that was the most unguarded she had ever seen on him, not vulnerable in the way that required softness, but open, genuinely and simply open, in the way of someone who has been closed for a very long time and has made a decision. He reached across the table. His hand covered hers. Neither of them spoke. The city pressed against the windows. Somewhere below, New York continued being itself, loud and indifferent, and completely unconcerned with what was happening on the 42nd floor. In the room, the overhead lights were too bright, and the blueprints were still wrong, and the coffee was cold, and none of it mattered at all. 3 weeks later, they sat across from each other at the same conference table where the contract had been signed. The document was between them again. His lawyer had drawn up the formal termination, a single page, clean and unambiguous, the legal closure of what they had started here. Ji-hoon picked up the pen, signed, slid the document to her. She signed. "The contract is terminated," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "I want to propose something else," he said. "A different arrangement. No terms, no timeline, no exit clause." Elena looked at him for a moment, at the measured, serious, entirely characteristic face of a man who communicated most efficiently when he was communicating simply. "That's a significant departure from your usual approach to agreements," she said. "It is," he agreed. "You're not going to give me a document to review." "Not this time." She was quiet for a moment. The city light came through the windows at a different angle now. The sun had shifted in the past 5 months, the season having moved while they were both busy becoming something to each other that neither had anticipated. "One condition," she said. Something moved in his expression, the same thing that had moved there the first time she'd said those words, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it, and warmer now, measurably warmer. "The photograph comes off the shelf," she said. "It can be on your desk. You don't have to look at it from a distance." The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It had texture. It had the particular quality of something old and painful being gently set down. "Agreed," he said. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the terminated contract sat between them like a door they had both already passed through and would not be going back to. She had come to this table 5 months ago to save her career. She had signed a document she'd been rational and clear-eyed about. She had told herself she knew exactly what she was doing. She had been right about almost everything except the part that turned out to matter most. She had signed a contract to protect everything she had built. She had never expected that the coldest man in every room she'd stood in would turn out to be keeping something warm, something irreplaceable, something he had protected so fiercely that the protection itself had looked like absence. She had never expected to be the person he would put the photograph on his desk for. But she was, and the city was still there outside the window, and the blueprints were still wrong. And Ji-hoon was looking at her the way he had looked at his son in that small black-framed photograph, with the thing that happened to his face when he had stopped deciding how it should look. She reached across the table. He took her hand. This time neither of them let go.